Hello and welcome to this video where we will talk about the United States as an arms supplier with an extraordinary example, Switzerland. How Switzerland was scammed by the United States and how other US clients are already complaining. This could lead to disaster in Europe, since we are waiting for $300 billion worth of equipment that has been ordered, which is supposed to be delivered in the coming years. Delivered or maybe not. Let me explain. First, in 2020, there was a referendum in Switzerland to approve a budget of about 6 billion Swiss francs to modernize its combat aircraft fleet, to replace the old F-18s with different types of aircraft. And in 2021, a decision was made in favor of the F-35 Lightning II, with a plan to buy 36 aircraft for 6 billion Swiss francs. Deliveries start in 2027. At that time, I was the digital editor-in-chief of Air at Cosmos magazine. We had received an email confirming that the Rafale had been officially chosen. The manufacturers told us, here you go, you can prepare your article. And then, announcement, Joe Biden is going to visit Switzerland, so the official announcement is postponed by a few weeks. Then suddenly, the Swiss announced they've chosen the F-35 for many technical reasons. It's clearly better than its competitors and, most importantly, the cheapest. Cheaper than the Rafale to buy and operate, and also cheaper than the F-18. So, we know the prices. We know that when they export the F-18, it's cheaper than when they export the F-35, and we know that the F-18 is much cheaper to operate than the F-35. So, we know that these explanations and these reasons are false, they're lies, and that's not all. Because later on in 2022, the Swiss will also choose the air defense system, Patriot, even though the Franco-Italian Mamba SAMP-T system had been considered more effective at the time. And that's also the case in Ukraine, where they say very clearly that the Mamba SAMP-T intercepts more aeroballistic missiles with a trajectory that is now maneuverable, unlike the Patriot. So this effectiveness had been validated by the Swiss and has been confirmed in Ukraine. And incidentally, the standard is to fire 2 Patriot interceptor missiles at a single target, whereas with the Aster 30 you only need to fire 1. So even if you really need to go to war, it's also cheaper. And so the Swiss decided to buy 5 Patriot air defense batteries for 1 billion Swiss francs, which should normally be delivered starting in 2026, but the situation is going to change. First, in 2025, we'll discover that the F-35 Block 4, which was supposed to be delivered starting in 2027, will actually only be available starting in 2025. So in 2031, planes without the planned capabilities will be delivered. And on top of that, there's an extra cost of 1.1 billion Swiss francs, which is quite expensive for a contract that was promised to be at a fixed price. The Swiss are cutting their order from 36 to 30 planes to stay within budget, but this prevents them from giving pilots the minimum training they need to maintain their operational skills and carry out all necessary missions like interception and air policing. And in the same year, the Swiss learn that, in the end, the delivery of their Patriot defense system won't happen as planned in 2027, but will be delayed by 4 or 5 years with a slight increase in cost, going from $1 to $3 billion. That triples the costs, and the reason is simple. The United States increased their presence in the Middle East with 4 to 6 batteries that were deployed starting in April 2025, and they then used up hundreds of missiles to protect Israel in the war that took place. Summer 2025, and then when Trump attacked the Middle East. And for example, 800 missiles were used up in the first 3 days, and between 3,000 and 4,000 missiles were used in the first 6 weeks of the conflict by all the Gulf countries, which represents, hold on, 5 years of production. And the Americans, they admit it. They say, we're using the equipment ourselves we had planned to sell. We're redirecting, for example, the sales that had been made for Ukraine with your money, you who are watching right now. You're paying taxes to buy equipment for the Ukrainians to defend Europe. The Americans say priority goes to America and Israel, so they're redirecting planned equipment. Switzerland, Ukraine, and others have also suffered from this. And faced with this situation, Switzerland simply decides to stop payments for the Patriot system, which won't arrive for several years due to delays, because they have old interception systems called Rapiers, which are reaching the end of their service life and can't be upgraded, unless they put in hundreds of millions of Swiss francs, again, into this budget. So they stop the payments. And what do the Americans do? Since we go through what's called foreign military sales, which means these are government-to-government purchases, actually it's the American government that buys and then supplies them. These are not direct contracts between a manufacturer and the country that's going to buy. The Americans, they take money that had been allocated for the F-35. They put it on the Swiss Patriot. They told the Swiss they had no more money for F-35 Saishi, Since the Swiss didn't want to pay for the Patriots, you've ended up covering that cost instead. But on the other hand, you have to put in more money to get your F-35s, which are going to be more expensive, etc. So the Swiss are getting totally ripped off. They redirected the money that had been allocated without the Swiss people's authorization. They are forcing the Swiss to keep buying more expensive systems because the contracts are not at a fixed price, contrary to what was planned. They won't have the operational systems on time. In short, the Swiss are getting ripped off across the board, so obviously the Swiss politicians are furious. There are some who even dare to say that the whole thing is frustrating, even that the situation is irritating and that trust in the United States has been affected. Oh, careful, that's Swiss-style anger. I think that one day they hope they'll dare to try to command some respect. But with such explosive statements, it's hard to believe that Donald Trump will really listen to you. But anyway, in the end, the United States has its own global priorities and they'll always put us second, simply out of fear that the United States might stop all support. Whereas for the Europeans, it's clear because if there's an Asian front and a European front, if they're involved, for example, in defending Taiwan, they say so. It's not Europe that's going to get the spare parts for the F-35, the ammunition, the necessary systems. We, Americans, will keep the equipment we need for our main war for ourselves. And they're right. Any country would do that, and they own up to it. It simply means that we are not sovereign, we cannot count on the Americans, and we cannot hope to have the necessary equipment on time if, unfortunately, tomorrow we end up with a double front, Europe plus Asia. The United States would go to Asia, their equipment would go to Asia, their spare parts would go to Asia, and today that's what we're seeing. Israel is the priority for getting the F-35 parts needed to keep the fleet flying at the pace required to conduct this war in Iran. Well, that means you have an international fleet whose level of efficiency and availability drops below 180 flight hours per year per F-35 instead of 220 hours per year. You just have to be ready for it. Switzerland and all U.S. clients will have to follow American decisions without any flexibility. They are buying American equipment that is worse than expected, at a higher price than expected, with lower availability and delivery times that are being pushed back. Everyone knows it, and there is no chance of being able to count on the United States in case of trouble. Everyone knows buying American means giving up sovereignty. Still, politicians keep bowing to the United States and buying pricier U.S. equipment that doesn't suit our needs instead of sourcing from Europe. And so, I know that Switzerland is supposed to be a neutral country that can't take sides, but to be disrespected and cheated like this, operationally, financially, in every way, by the United States, like this, it's just not acceptable. But this is just a taste of what's going to happen next, for Switzerland, but also for all the countries buying from the United States around the world. Look at what's happening in Australia, in Japan, in Taiwan. We're discussing tens of billions of dollars in equipment that, in some cases, hasn't been delivered, doesn't meet standards, and costs more to operate than anticipated. To the point that a growing number of countries are officially saying they can no longer financially support American purchases, especially with the F-35, which is, for example, reviving mixed fleets. Australia and Japan were supposed to give up their old planes to be 100% F-35, but now they're canceling their latest F-35 orders to extend the lifespan of their previous aircraft so they can maintain a mixed fleet. Let me remind you that the Americans claim that a single fleet is cheaper. But in reality, even the United States is extending and buying F-15s, even though they shouldn't be buying them anymore. They should be switching everything to the F-35. So even the Americans who claim that a fleet made up of a single aircraft type is cheaper, even the Americans know it and admit it today. And there's a country, Germany, our neighbor, which today is becoming the cornerstone of the USA in Europe, putting pressure on Europe. Germany. Germany is putting pressure on all European countries to try to impose American equipment, and that prevents us from breaking free from this dependency, and that keeps us from ever hoping to be sovereign. So among the betrayals that the Germans have committed against Europe, we can, for example, talk about the purchase of Chinook helicopters instead of going with the Airbus H225. They partnered with Kratos for combat drones instead of sticking with Neuron, which had been very effective with Dassault and satisfied everyone, including the Swedes. We had done a great job back then. The creation of a complete air defense system around the Patriot, instead of starting from the Franco-Italian system, which actually has better results, as I told you. The development with Raytheon for missiles, instead of deepening the partnership with MBDA, which actually has branches, MBDA UK, Italy, France, Germany. The Germans partnering with Endural on anti-drone systems and AI, Even though Ukraine leads in this area, suggests that by ignoring Ukraine, we may be missing an opportunity for sovereignty. The purchase of Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft for maritime patrol, instead of buying Airbus A321 MPA, which France is going to acquire. And then, of course, the F-35. Even though Germany produces the Eurofighter and Germany has expressed its desire to have nuclear weapons without depending on the United States. Except that since the Germans are allergic to contracts with France, today they prefer once again to submit to the Americans. They refuse industrial partnerships while clearly being clients of France. They accept being clients of the United States. They accept being the lackeys of the United States. They think this will give them a leading industrial position in Europe by producing under license in Europe equipment that comes from the United States or on which the Americans will retain control. I'll give you an example. But when France sold Rafales with Scalp missiles to Egypt at the time, 2% of the Scalp missiles were American. The Americans wanted to block the entire deal by preventing the delivery of Scalp missiles to Egypt. And so that was supposed to ruin the whole deal in order to try to supply more American planes and equipment. So in this case, when German systems that include American equipment are sold to Europe in the future, potentially they could remove them. They could deactivate them remotely. Please see the video I made on this subject. But potentially none of this equipment will be prioritized to receive the spare parts we might need in a few years, in a few decades, to face a high-intensity conflict against Russia or in an engagement in another country a bit farther away. So there is a solution. We urgently need to stop all partnerships with the Americans. We urgently need to stop buying American. The countries that started buying F-35s need to stop at their small F-35 orders and switch to a dual fleet by buying the Gripen. Where's my Gripen? It's behind me. There it is, my Gripen, or even better, the Rafale. But well, people will say I'm biased then. Still, it's the best plane you can find. They need to buy systems, subsystems, and equipment, despite better options available, even in Ukraine. In Europe, you have everything you need. This is not just wishful thinking. There isn't a single area where Europe isn't capable of doing better than Russia. And if we want to be stronger than Russia, European equipment can do the job. We don't need to multiply the prices by 4 to do as well as the Americans, when we can set the right price for the real need, which is to be ready to face a possible open and direct war with Russia tomorrow. I don't know if you know any politicians. Don't hesitate to vote for those who are relevant, consistent in their choices, and committed to sovereignty. I really want a strong Europe that stands on its own, and not necessarily with French equipment. But the Germans need to stop trying to take everything for themselves and ruin our prospects for strategic independence. Donald Trump is something, but what comes after might be even worse, even more dangerous. We have to accept today that our so-called Western partnership with the Americans no longer holds, and it will be even weaker tomorrow. Just look at how the United States attacked Safran or Airbus over so-called partnerships with China. When Americans sell in China, it's fine, but when Europeans do, suddenly it's very serious. There's corruption, and they have to be attacked. We need to put a stop to this. The extraterritoriality of the dollar, of American law, all that. We just have to be able to stand up, take responsibility, and say we've had enough, and we stop right now. That's it. Germans, I'm counting on you. All the other Europeans, we're counting on you. France has been saying the same thing for 60 years. As they say in Belgium, we weren't out of touch. General de Gaulle was right before anyone else. I hope you enjoyed it and see you soon.